Hey guys, a little over a week ago, I was doing one of my prison services at here in Oklahoma, and one of the guys before we got started, he was asking some questions, and he was suggesting some different topics that they would like me to respond to. And one of those things he asked about, he said, he had been talking to some person in there, and they had been discussing or debating about under the law and what that means, whether we're under the law or not. And this guy he was talking to said, well, we're not under the law. And he was saying, yeah, we are under the law. And one of the other guys in the service began to sort of take issue with him. And he began to say a lot of things, and he began to he opened up to the book of Galatians, I think Galatians 3, and began to read. And so I ended up talking about that subject for quite a while, and a lot of various topics that relate to that. And so I think that some of these issues really need to be addressed, and that there's a lot of misunderstanding on much of these subjects pertaining to the law. Once again, I'm always talking about precision of language. And really, the English word law is not really the best translation in many respects. I mean, when we're talking about usually the Hebrew word Torah, it's usually translated that way. A better translation often would be a teaching or instruction. But because in this word law comes with quite a bit of baggage, and so people have been conditioned to think about this, the law is bad and all of that. But I want to look at that, and I want to examine some of these things that are brought up a lot of times and see if they really make sense in light of Scripture or in light of other things. And hopefully we will dispel some cognitive dissonance and maybe come to a better understanding and greater clarity of some of these topics. Now, I have a whole bunch of scriptures here, as I often do, but I'm not going to read all of this. I'll read a few of them. It says, now we know that whatsoever the law says, it says to them that are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. Okay, well, that sounds like that's something necessary that needs to happen or needed to happen. Let me read that again. Now we know that whatsoever things the law says, it says to them that are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. How? By being under that standard, and by being the ultimate authority, and that since no one can measure up 100%, everyone sees or should be able to see that they are guilty, and that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so, well, let me just read a few, and then I'll go back and I'll try to comment on some of these. For sin shall not have dominion over you, for you are not under the law, but under grace. That's the one that's usually quoted so often. That's in Romans 6:14. But then we've got this. What then? Shall we sin because we are not under the law, but under grace? God forbid. So, let's try Galatians 3:23. But before faith came, we were kept under the law, shut up unto the faith which should afterwards be revealed. I think I've got a whole lot of them here, but tell me, you that desire to be under the law, do you not hear the law? Galatians 4:21. Galatians 5:18. But if you be led of the Spirit, you are not under the law. So, bunch of stuff about being under the law, and that doesn't sound very good, does it? I mean, for the most part, the way that is the context of that, it doesn't sound like a very positive thing at all. And one of the guys, as I mentioned, he read something about this in Galatians 3:13 as part of his rebuttal. He says, Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us, for it is written, cursed is everyone that hangs upon a tree. And so I asked him, I said, so it says there that Christ has redeemed us from the law, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, no, that's not what it said at all. I said, what did it say he redeemed us of? And he said, the law. And I said, nope, that's not what it said. What did he redeem us from or of? The curse of the law. The curse of the law and the law, or the curse of the Torah and the Torah, is not the same thing. What is the curse of the law? Is the curse of the law a curse that comes from being obedient to it or disobedient to it? The curse comes from not obeying the law. That's when the curse comes. And you can go back and you can look in the book of Leviticus and other places that will outline and go into great specificity about the curse of the law and what will happen if you don't follow the commandments of God. And a lot of people, I've heard people say, well, we're not under the, we're not under the law, or we're not under the curse of the law. Well, we shouldn't be, but usually all the evidence says otherwise. Because if you go back and you look and you see what are the signs of the curse of the law, you'll see them all around you. And you might see them in your life too. All kinds of things that it says will happen to you for disobedience to the scriptures. We see those things all around us. Our country is under the curse of the law, as well as pretty much everywhere else. Some places worse than others. But this is a very real thing. So regarding under the law, let's look at that for a minute, because that sounds like a bad thing to me. And I think that if you look at this, it's not a good thing. But like most things, if you look at this, and I'll read a couple of them again, but if you are led of the Spirit, you are not under the curse of the law. Okay, that is an if-then statement. If you're led of the Spirit, you're not under the law. Are most people and most so-called believers, are they led of the Spirit? I would say very few of them are. So whether you call yourself a Christian or a Messianic or Hebrew roots or whatever you call yourself, if you're not being led of the Spirit, it would indicate that to some extent you are under the law here, and quite possibly under the curse of the law. Looking back at one of these again, it says that, what then shall we sin because we are not under the law but under grace? God forbid. Here we go. For sin shall not have dominion over you, for you are not under the law but under grace. And so it's contrasting at times this idea of being under the law as opposed to being under grace. Now, one of the things that I talk about often is looking at the scriptures through their authentic Hebrew lens. And we have a tendency, we don't realize we do this because we just do these things by rote. We just do these things naturally because we've been conditioned to. When we pick up the Bible and we decide we're going to read it, or better yet, we decide we're going to study it, we don't realize that we're reading the scriptures or hearing the scriptures through a filter that we've inherited. We interpret the scriptures through the filters that we've inherited through religious affiliations, like churches that we went to as children or adults, or things that we've seen on television or heard on radio or whatever. Even if you weren't listening, those things form impressions. They plant seeds, and it like I said, it creates a filter that even if you're trying to be honest and objective in going through and looking at the scriptures, at first you're going to be looking at them through that filter. And so it takes a lot of effort and work to realize those things are there and to go about eliminating them and trying to see the scriptures through their authentic Hebraic language and culture. And so the New Testament wasn't written in a vacuum. The background of the New Testament writings are not our 21st century Western Christian paradigms. The background of the writings in the New Testament were what people typically refer to as the Old Testament, or what is referred to more properly referred to as the Tanakh. The Torah, the writings, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, the Tanakh. It's an acronym for the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. And so Christians have been taught this, again, what I consider to be a pejorative term, Old Testament, which is not biblical, by the way. And again, it's so important to get our terminology right, because the way we speak affects how we think, and the way we think affects how we interpret information, how we ultimately live. And so the Apostle Paul, who most of these things, most of what I've read is from him, and maybe I think all of it, referring to under the law, is written by him. The Apostle Paul, unlike the caricature portrait that most of us have inherited of him, most of us picture the Apostle Paul in a Roman toga, maybe talking with a King James accent or something. But the real Apostle Paul was a Jew of Jews, a Pharisee of Pharisees, a Hebrew of the tribe of Benjamin, circumcised the 8th day. He studied at the feet of Gamaliel, one of history's greatest Torah teachers, the grandson of the great Torah teacher Hillel. Paul claimed to be blameless concerning the Torah. He claimed to be, and this is after his conversion, he said that he was blameless concerning the Torah, that he followed the Torah with greater zeal than any of his peers. And numerous times in the New Testament, like there are several times in the book of Acts, that he says, I'm not saying anything different than what the Torah or the law and the prophets didn't already say. And in one place he says, if I'm a heretic after the way that people describe heresy, let it be known that I believe all things written in the law and in the prophets. So unlike the picture that's been painted of him, Paul kept and believed all things written in the law and the prophets, the Tanakh, the Old Testament. And again, to paint the picture accurately here, Paul was not only was he not some English-speaking guy wearing a toga, this was a Jewish man wearing the tallit and the traditional Jewish clothes and speaking like a Jew and living like a Jew. But Paul didn't have a New Testament under his arm going to a church with a steeple on it on Sundays, okay? If we look in the book of Acts, it's over and over talks about Paul going into the synagogue every Sabbath day and teaching and conversing with both Jews and Gentiles every week in the synagogue on Sabbath, as his custom was, following the commandment. And so that is the biblical Paul. And the biblical Paul, once again, didn't have a New Testament under his, he wasn't carrying a New Testament around, nor was anyone else. That is a misnomer. A lot of people refer to the New Testament church, the first century New Testament church. There's a problem a little bit with that, because in the first century there wasn't a church and there wasn't a New Testament. Okay? The scriptures that they had, when Paul writes, all Scripture is inspired of God, what Scriptures did they have at the time? The Tanakh. When it's talking about the Scriptures, it's talking about the Tanakh or the Old Testament. Again, in Timothy, he talks about that the Holy Scriptures that are able to make you wise unto salvation that you've been raised with, that's talking about the Tanakh. There's not a New Testament section yet. And it's going to be a while before that's all put together. At best, they might have had some copies of maybe some of the Gospels or something, but they continued to go to the synagogue, they continued to go to the temple, and they continued to follow pretty much what they always had, only now they see that the long-awaited Messiah has come that completes their whole faith. So let's try to understand this phrase, under the law, the way the Apostle Paul probably understood it. Because, again, this stuff isn't just written in a vacuum. Although Paul was given great revelation of what? Basically, revelation of the Scriptures that he already had and knew very, very well. Now that a lot of these scales had fallen off, he was able to see the Messiah all through the Tanakh, all through the Old Testament, which unfortunately most Christians and even Christian pastors don't today. Most Christian pastors probably couldn't take you to 2 or 3 places maybe. If you say, show me the Messiah in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, most of them, once they turn to Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22 and maybe Genesis 3:15 or something, if they even come up with those, I think they would be out of places to show you the Messiah. But the believers in the first century saw the Messiah all the way through there. And as we begin to see the Scriptures guided by the Spirit, looking at the Scriptures through their authentic Hebrew lens, then we begin to see the Messiah from the very first word, the very first sentence in the Bible, all the way through. So let's realize that the New Testament, the background of the New Testament writings is not our time and culture. The background of the writings of the New Testament is the Tanakh. They're Scriptures, the only thing they had. So, under the law, let's talk about that and let's think about that. When was the law given? Who was it given to? Well, on one level, these things have always been around because in the beginning was the Word. And we can go back and see that Adam and Eve, there's reason to believe that they understood some laws, particularly Cain and Abel. They knew about the proper way to sacrifice. And that was part of the reason that Abel's sacrifice was accepted and Cain's was not. They knew what was proper and what was expected. In the time of Noah, Noah knew the difference between clean and unclean animals. That didn't start in the time of Moses. Animals were always clean or unclean from the very beginning, and those commandments were already there. So Noah wouldn't have been eating pig or shellfish or that sort of thing. He wouldn't have been eating unclean animals, nor would the people of God that followed. Abraham, we see him following different Torah commandments that weren't yet given to the entire nation. In the book of Exodus, chapter 19 and 20, we see now the Torah given to the entire nation, and specifically the 10 Commandments. And so you'll remember the 10 Commandments, Moses was called up to Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, and that God wrote the 10 Commandments on these 2 stones on the front and on the back. And Moses goes down, finds the golden calf, smashes the tablets at the base of the mountain, and then he goes back up the mountain later on, and only this time Moses carves out the commandments himself. He brings the stones up to God, and God writes upon them. Both times God wrote upon them. In fact, it says They were written with the finger of God, both sets. Moses didn't write those things, okay? And so those are often referred to as the testimonial tablets, or the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant housed the Ten Commandments. Sometimes it's referred to as the Ark of the Witness, or the Adut, the Ark of the Testimony. Same thing. And so inside of the Ark of the Covenant, the most important piece of furniture, recently we were reading through the Torah portion Teruma in the book of Exodus, I believe starting in chapter 24, 25, that when God gives the plans to Moses for the tabernacle, he doesn't start with the outside of the tabernacle, the courtyard, or the structure, and give the measurements at first. It begins by going to the most interior room, the Holy of Holies, the Kiddush Kiddushim, and begins to give us the information, the blueprints for the Ark of the Covenant, the Aron. The thing in the most important piece of furniture in the whole tabernacle, in the whole Mishkan, is the Ark of the Covenant. It's there that the presence of God resides, over the ark. So that pillar of cloud and fire over the tabernacle specifically was over the Ark of the Covenant, over the Aron. And so when we think about the Ark of the Covenant, I don't want to get into all the detail of that. I'll try to do that again some other time, about the dimensions and all of that. 2.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits, made with pure gold, inside and out, covering the acacia or shittim wood. But the lid is actually a separate piece of furniture. There's 6 pieces of furniture described, and then the 7th one is the lid. It's considered sort of its own separate piece of furniture, but ultimately it becomes one, unites everything else, as it's put upon the box, or upon the ark, the lid of atonement. And so we've got this box called the ark, and inside of it is a pot of manna, the bread from heaven, representing the Messiah. Moshe gave you not that bread from heaven, but the bread of God is he that cometh down from heaven, gives life unto the world, John chapter 6. The rod that budded, Aaron's rod that budded, that was a sign of who and what tribe the true priesthood would come from. But more specifically, because the Aaron's rod budded overnight and produced almonds. It was an almond stick that came alive again, or in other words, was resurrected. So the sign of the priesthood of the resurrection was something else that was inside of the Ark of the Covenant. And then the 10 Commandments, or the law, if you will, and some even say the broken set of tablets according to tradition. So we've got a box there, and we've got the law inside of it. And it says that God is going to speak from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim. God doesn't speak from under the Ark of the Covenant, below the law. The Spirit isn't speaking from under the law there. On top of the ark is the lid of atonement, or the kepharet, the lid of covering, and that has the 2 cherubim, the two cherubim on top. And it tells us in about 3 places at least that God will speak from between the 2 cherubim above the mercy seat, or above the grace, if you will. So when we're talking about we're not under the law but under grace, or if you walk in the Spirit, we're not under the law, it's a matter of positioning. How are we positioned to the law? How are we positioned to those commandments? And so there's a proper way to do it. If, let's say I have a Bible, let's say I have the law, the Torah, and I put it on my head like this, okay? So would it be fair to say that now I'm under the law? Yeah, okay. Or even if I had a great big, if you've ever seen a true Torah scroll, that those things are really large, you know, and those are carried around in the synagogue, and everybody touches and touches the scroll, and they sing the song about the tree of life. And so, you know, in a sense, I suppose, I mean, if you, especially if you're carrying it over your head, you could say that that person is under the law. Or like this, if I had uh, a Torah over my head and lived that way, or on my shoulder, and I carried it around that way, we could say that I'm under the law. But what if instead, what if I ate this thing? What if I ate the scriptures? Kind of like we see actually in Revelation chapter 10, I believe it is, that John is given this scroll by an angel, and he eats it, and it becomes bitter in his, sweet in his mouth, but bitter in his stomach. Just the reverse that happens to Ezekiel, that he takes this scroll and it's bitter in his mouth but sweet in his stomach. That we could maybe another way to think of it. Let's say that I have a great big Torah scroll on my back that I'm carrying around, and instead I have all of that information put on a thumb drive or digitalized, and I listen to it with my cell phone or some other device. It's the same information, but the form of it has changed, and my relationship to that has changed. And so I believe that Paul, when he's talking about under the law, is thinking about the Ark of the Covenant. That is a picture really of us, or the heart, the most internal thing. And inside of it, inside of the ark or the heart, is supposed to contain the law. Okay? That is the new covenant. A lot of people say, well, we're under the new covenant now. We're not under the old covenant. We're under the new covenant. So far, pretty much anybody that I've ever heard say that can't tell me what it even is or who it was made with. Hebrews 8:8, quoting from Jeremiah 31, if you go there, that it says, in those days I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, and I will write my laws upon their hearts and upon their minds. The new covenant is having the law of God internalized, not written on tablets of stone now that we're under, but being under that mercy seat. And God is going to be speaking above the mercy seat, not under the law. So I believe that this is the picture that Paul had in mind, being that that is the culture there of the Ark of the Covenant, and not being under the commandments, but the commandments being housed within, and God speaking above the mercy seat or above that place of grace. Okay, so these things are not mutually exclusive. And I would ask some questions, because and there's so many things. My dog's getting impatient to be fed, but she's a little bit early. Let's look at this real quick, because again, there's so much cognitive dissonance. How many times have you heard Protestant preachers talk about Jesus having done away with the law's done away with, and we sure are glad now that we can eat pork chops and do whatever we want? And I've heard preachers say similar things than that. And then maybe next week they will do a sermon on tithing and talk about how you're under a curse if you're not tithing. And we'll show you there, right there in black and white in the book of Malachi, that because you've been withholding your tithes from God, you're under a curse. And these same people will say you're not under the curse of the law, and the law's been done away with. It's cognitive dissonance. I think rather convenient in that case. How many times have you heard pastors or people bemoan the 10 Commandments being removed out of a courthouse or out of the state capitol or something like that? Yet then they say that these things are done away with, or they're just for the Jews. Cognitive dissonance. Again, the new covenant is to have those things internalized. The new covenant, if you look at Ezekiel 36, it says that God will give us a new spirit so that we can keep his commandments. It's actually the term mishpatim and kukim, his judgments and his statutes, giving us a new heart and a new spirit so that we're able to do that. That is the new covenant. And it says that if we love God, we will keep his commandments, and his commandments are not grievous. Now, a lot of people teach that. Preachers say that it's impossible to do it. People say that they are is a grievous thing, that it's bondage. That's really on the verge of blasphemy. And I think God has patience with people and compassion because of the blindness and ignorance of their heart, and because of the culture that we've been raised in and all the brainwashing. But it's ridiculous. I want to take some of these things back down to the natural for a second and show you, hopefully, how these things play out a little bit. Like, how did you feel when a few years ago, when cities were burning after the George Floyd situation, where cities were burning all around the country, and there began to be a movement toward defunding the police? Let me just ask you that. How would you feel about defunding the police in your community? Do you think that would be a good thing, or do you think that would be a bad thing? If you've got any sense, you know that would be a very bad thing. That it would be a very negative thing to have the police defunded. What are police? Police are law enforcement. They enforce the law, right? What would it be a good thing if we did away with law? Well, a lot of people would like that. That's called anarchy. That's called lawlessness. That's something very much condemned in the scripture. In a number of places, Yeshua said, "Many shall come to me on that day, saying, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not cast out devils and do many wondrous works? And I will say unto them, Depart from me, you workers of iniquity, I never knew you." The word workers of iniquity there is anomia, you who transgress the law. Now, these are believers, these people that are coming to him saying, did we not do all these things? He's given us the best possible example that we would look at, and when we hear that example, we would think, surely that person would be going into the kingdom. But he's saying, no, you can't just tell by that, by the gifts that they're able to operate in. That's not all there is to it. And a lot of these people are going to be called, it says many, in fact, calls them workers of iniquity or anomia. That means transgressors of the law, and no doubt many of them had been taught that the law had been done away with. And they're expecting to be embraced and welcomed by the Messiah, and they are sent away with, what does it say? Weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's not a good situation at all. Let's imagine. Let's use like a common scenario. Maybe you're driving down the road and you hear a siren, and you look in the rearview mirror and red lights behind you, and you get pulled over, and the cop comes up and he says, you're in a hurry, and begins to ask you questions. And he said, well, I clocked you doing 65 in a 55 mile per hour speed zone back there. And maybe you didn't know it. Maybe you didn't know that, maybe you didn't see the sign, you're in a different area. You didn't know that it was 55. And he says, well, you seem like an honest person. I'm going to give you a warning this time. But if I catch you again, I'm writing you a ticket. So the law didn't change just then. The law is still, it's 55 miles per hour, and you were transgressing the law. It didn't affect the cop giving you grace. That's what he did. The cop gave you mercy or grace, and he didn't give you the curse of the law, the penalty at that time. But he's not going to do that indefinitely. He gave you a warning. He gave you grace, not that so you could habitually violate the law. If he catches you again, you're probably not going to get grace again. Certainly if you do that all the time and he constantly is pulling you over, he's going to start giving you the fullest penalty that he can, I'm sure. And so this is the way this works in the natural, I don't believe is really much different in the spiritual. And Paul said that I wouldn't know what sin was except for by the law. John defines it in 1 John. He says that whosoever sins transgresses also the law, for sin is the transgression of the law. That's one of the primary ways that sin is defined, is that it is a breaking of the law. Missing the mark is what sin means. Torah is to hit the mark. Sin is to miss the mark. And so sin is the breaking of the law. Paul said, I wouldn't know what sin was except for by the law, because it is the standard by which we know what's right and wrong. And he says also that where there's no law, sin is not imputed unto man. So, knowing all of that, let's try to plug in some of these theologies to that. If indeed, what a lot of people say, if indeed the law has been done away with, since without law sin is not imputed unto man, that means if the law is done away with, I can do anything that I want with impunity. I can't be judged by a law that doesn't exist. Much less, I certainly can't be convicted based upon a law that doesn't exist. And if that's true, if the law has been done away with, I don't need grace. You only need grace in a situation where there is law, because we're human and all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Therefore, we need grace. It's a necessity. But if there is no law, if there is no standard of righteousness, we don't even need grace anymore. Okay? So this whole thing is really ridiculous. And I could attack this from so many different angles and show the folly and fallacies associated with this. And it's time that we get these things straightened out. Now, there is a difference. Again, we shouldn't be under the law. We don't want to be under the law. We want to be walk in the Spirit so that we're not under the law, and we want to stay in that position of grace where the law is inside of us, but we're under the covering of grace, not under big old rocks, okay, carrying them around. It should become more and more an easy thing for us to carry inside of us and to begin to live out the fullness, more of the fullness of the new covenant. Now, a lot of groups, I know the Seventh-day Adventist, and probably most of the groups that I can think of, they talk a lot about, some of them will say, well, okay, well, not all of the law has been done away with. They will say things like the moral law that we've got, moral law and ceremonial law, and that the moral law, such as thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, commit adultery, things like that, that's still intact and still valid. But the ceremonial law, such as Passover and Feast of Weeks and Feast of Tabernacles and the Sabbath, or the dietary laws or the sacrificial laws and all that kind of stuff, all of that ceremonial law, and that's been done away with. That's been nailed to the cross. Another thing I need to deal with, that phrase. Okay, well, that's totally false. And again, as I'm always saying, we have to use precision of language, and it's ironic to me. I think it's kind of comical at times that many of the Seventh-day Adventists, they often talk about this moral law and ceremonial law. Next time that you run into someone like a Seventh-day Adventist or someone else, and they tell you that, well, the moral law, that's still in effect, but the ceremonial law, that's been done away with, ask them, Where did you get those terms, that terminology, moral law and ceremonial law? I don't think they'll be able to tell you, but I'll tell you. They get that. It's very ironic because the Seventh-day Adventists are among the most anti-Catholic denomination out there. It's funny to me that a lot of the groups that are very anti-Catholic will use these terms, moral law and ceremonial law, and a lot of other terms too. Moral law and ceremonial law comes from a guy named Thomas Aquinas, who was a Catholic priest and theologian. And he came up with these categories of the law that we have: moral law, judicial law, and ceremonial law. Okay, that all sounds real good, doesn't it? Except that's not how the Bible defines any of this. This is what I call leavened language. These are made up terms by a theologian to be able to win arguments and justify not following the Torah. Okay, so the scriptures does not break, the law does not define itself as moral law, judicial law, and ceremonial law at all. If you go to Psalm 19, you'll see a lot of different descriptions. The Bible uses words like Torah, Torot, laws, commandments, mitzvot, statutes such as a chukim, a mishpatim, judgments, and devarim. Technically the 10 commandments are the 10 devarim, the 10 words, the 10 utterances, the 10 declarations, adut, witnesses. There's lots of different, so those are the ways that the Bible describes the different types of commandments. Now, sometimes all of the commandments are broken down into two categories of mishpatim and chukim, or judgments and ordinances or statutes. In fact, that is the terms used in the book of Ezekiel 36 when it talks about the new covenant, having that new heart, that new spirit, so that we can keep his judgments and his statutes. Those types of commandments that seem rational, and those types of the commandments that don't seem rational, so that we can keep both of them. And so, again, whoever controls the vocabulary, controls the terminology, controls the thinking, and controls how people live. And so if you're using wrong words like that, your thinking's going to be messed up. And so there's so many examples of that we could use. It says in the New Testament, Paul again says that the law is good and holy in the book of Romans chapter 7. He says, do we make the law void through faith? Because a lot of people try to make that. He says, God forbid. We do not make the law void through faith. We establish it. So I would ask this: if the type of faith and law that Paul is talking about is established through faith, is that what we see with most groups, with most denominations, or if you call yourself non-denominational? Does your group, is the Torah established through your faith with you and with your group? Because Paul said that that's the way it's supposed to be, that the law is not made void through faith. God forbid, it is established through faith. Revelation chapter 22, the very last chapter in the New Testament, it says, blessed are they that keep his commandments, that they may have a right to the tree of life and may enter in through the gates into the city. Everybody wants to enter into that kingdom, right? Blessed are they that do his commandments, that they may have a right to do that. For outside, basically, are lawbreakers. And it's going to describe these different categories of lawbreakers. Yeshua himself in so many places. People constantly are talking about how Yeshua did away with the law and believe and think that he did. When he said, think not. He says to do the opposite of what most people do. Matthew 5:17, he said, "Think not that I have come to destroy or abolish the law and the prophets." Don't think that. The very thing that most people think, Yeshua says, do not think that. Think not that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill. A lot of people stop. Oh, yeah, there you go. That's what he fulfilled it. Therefore, he ended it. Therefore, we don't have to do it. Okay, so we're going to make up words and we're going to make up definitions, apparently, because that's what's happened. So the word fulfill has been turned into something that it doesn't mean. It's that same Greek word that when Yeshua went to John the Baptist to become baptized, you'll remember that John was reluctant to do it. And John said, he said, "I'm not worthy to do this thing." And Yeshua said, "Suffer it to be so, for we must fulfill all righteousness." So if we're going to interpret fulfill in Matthew 5:17 as end, we have to be consistent and do it in that case and say, "Go ahead and baptize me, John. Suffer to be so, for we must end all righteousness." Does that really make any sense? No, not at all. I mean, that is completely turning the meaning and words around from what they mean to protect a false theology. Let me give you one other example of how insidious a lot of times words are and the manipulation of words, and how that if we use the right words, or if people use the right words, they can persuade people. Let's say that I go into a church this Sunday and I talk on this subject, only I talk on it in a way through their filter more, and I say, let me say that, let's say I'm an invited guest and I go up there and speak, and let's say I do this, and I say, "I want to just encourage all of you today. I just want to encourage all of you that we need to do better at breaking God's law. We know that God's law is bad. It's bad, bad, bad. It's a curse, and that it's something that we should never do, and we should make sure that we eliminate God's law from every part of our life, and we do our best anytime we're put in the situation so that we break God's law." Amen? Do you think anybody would agree with that? I don't think that they would. Why? Because of the way that I phrased that. Because I was actually being accurate. Now, let's imagine I go into the same church and I say this. "Hi, thanks for having me today. I'm Keith. I'd like to talk to you today about the law." Now, some of you may or may not be aware, but there's lots of false teachers. There's lots of false theologies out there. You've got lots of Judaizers these days that are trying to get people to be obedient to that Jewish law. And that Jewish law is a curse. It's been nailed to the tree. And if you are trying to keep that Jewish law, you are under the law, you are under the curse of the law, and you have fallen from grace. Amen? And I think that most of them would totally agree, because I use different words. Instead of calling it God's law, which it is, I called it Jewish law. Is there any... Yeah, I mean, there is a such thing as Jewish law, but the scriptures, it is not Jewish law. The scriptures and the Torah was given by God, not given by the Jews. Moses didn't make this thing up. Moses didn't write the Torah. He did actually write it. It was given to him by God. But the law is not the Jewish law. Once again, that is very much like, this is what's happened. We have these people, these false teachers. A lot of them, most of the time, they don't realize they're false. But they tell us, okay, it's bad to try to keep those old Jewish laws, Passover, the Sabbath, the Jewish Sabbath, all of this stuff. It's bad. And if you're trying to do that, or if you're trying to, if you're afraid to eat pork or this sort of thing, and you don't want to eat that, you've listened to these Judaizers, and you're under the curse of the law, and you've fallen from grace. They're going to define it and use those kinds of words because they probably have inherited those things. They're not going to do it the way that I first said. They're not going to flat out up front say, attack God's law and say that God's law is bad and that we shouldn't be obedient to it. They're going to use pseudo language. They're going to use false language. And Passover is not Jewish law. Passover was given by God. The Sabbath is not the Jewish Sabbath. That's who mainly has kept it. But Passover, the Sabbath, all of these different laws were given to humanity by the Creator. And so a lot of these tactics and twisting Scripture is how we got in this situation. I haven't had time to delve into much of it. I'm planning on in the future addressing a lot more of these things. So if you have questions or comments, or if there's passages in the Scripture that you are having trouble reconciling, like nailed to the cross, that kind of thing, I'll try to do one on it sometime in the future, or these other phrases, so that we can eliminate as much of this deception and cognitive dissonance as we can, and we can begin to become more balanced and integrated and repent. Because it's not a glory to God to break His law. It doesn't honor the Messiah to violate the commandments, as He said. And I didn't finish it up, but think not that I have come to destroy the law of the prophets. I have not come to destroy but fulfill. Verily I say unto you, not the smallest jot or tittle shall in no wise pass away from the law until heaven and earth pass away, and all these things are fulfilled. The smallest letter or decoration upon the letter will not pass away until heaven and earth pass away. And so if you can look outside and you still see the heavens and the earth out there, know that not one letter or decoration on the letter has passed away from the law. In fact, in the book of Luke, Yeshua says that it's easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one tittle, one decoration on a letter to pass away. He goes on to say that whosoever then breaks one of the least commandments and teaches other people to do that will be least in the kingdom. But those who keep and teach them will be great in the kingdom. That is the antithesis of what is taught by most Christian groups. Most Christian groups teach the exact opposite of what Yeshua taught there, and in so many other places, what Paul taught. They have cherry-picked a handful of scriptures out of the New Testament, usually Galatians or other writings of Paul most of the time. They have taken it removed it from the first century Hebraic context and put a modern Western filter on it and totally turn things upside down from what they're actually saying. Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe, hit the notification button, and share this video with other people maybe that have questions about under the law and some of these passages, and that they're trying to reconcile and trying to understand better. So pass these on and share them with other people. Hope to see you real soon. Take care.
Hey, if you like this video, please click like and subscribe to be notified whenever we release new content, and to help other people find us out there on the vast plains of YouTube land. If you have a question or a topic you'd like for us to do a video about, just leave it in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. Later, y'all.